And it is so great to be back again with our folks from History's Mysteries. And is that still, am I using the correct title still?
We're
Uh-uh.
actually Private Eye History Detectives now. iCivics is hosting our materials, and that's good news for you because it means they're a little more accessible and a little more
Oh,
streamlined, polished. Yes, good word,
Polished.
Kelly.
Oh, okay. Well, we do have Lori and Kelly with us today. And I don't know if any of you have been in their sessions before. I think so. They do such a fantastic job. Tons and tons of resources available to you, and they're going to give you some idea of how you might use those. These are practitioners that are your fellow colleagues, educators. So we always love working with folks like that. So we certainly appreciate you being here with us. As always, if you all have questions, please feel free to use the chat box. Sometimes there's times you could unmute and ask a question. Feel free to do those. And I'm just going to let you all take it away, and we'll get rolling.
all right. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to get us started here. Get into presentation mode, and then we'll get started. But thanks so much for joining us today, folks. And as Jackie mentioned, we'll probably have a few people joining as we get started. So
welcome. Our goal today is to talk about how do we get the most out of professional learning communities. And we know you all have a wide array of sort of experience or inexperience with that, and that's fine. We're going to talk about that and answer any questions you have as we spend our time together today.
all right, so just really quickly, for those of you who joined us before in November, you might remember, but my name is Kelly, and I am actually a high school history teacher, where I have been teaching in East Hampton, Massachusetts for the last 22, 23 years. And I've been a professional development kind of facilitator for about 15 years for K to 12. And then Lori and I embarked on this journey about 3 years ago, where we decided we wanted to create an inquiry-based elementary curriculum that we called History's Mysteries, which is now Private Eye History Detectives. But I think the most important thing to tell you is, like you, I go to school every day and teach kids. And so this is really about teachers working with teachers and helping teachers with resources. And that, for Lori and I, is the most important thing for us. So we're really excited to be here. And we also recognize that you also got up very early this morning and have spent the day with children and are tired like we are. So we're just psyched that you're here with us, and we'll make this energetic and engaging and hopefully quite useful, so you can take away some materials to work with your peers.
All right, and I'm Lori Risler. My background is as an elementary school teacher, both general education and special education. I'm currently working at Westfield State University with pre-service teachers. So although I am not necessarily teaching in the elementary school every day, I spend a lot of time there and working with my students there. Actually had a history night last night with my undergraduates and a whole bunch of local young people sharing some inquiry-based history. And to me, it's really about serving teachers. Teachers are my favorite people. we are a tribe, and supporting one another, to me, is really where it's at. And so we are so excited to be here, so excited to share and to be available to you to answer questions. So we have a few other characters. These are History's Mysteries, now Private Eye. Kelly, you're gonna have to catch me every time. Detective kids. And one of our ideas was that, students have this sense that they're out on this journey solving mysteries with other kids. So our kids are Victoria, Tien, Morgan, and Tasha. And as you go through the curriculum, you will see them, and you'll see them in our slideshow today because they're sort of family at this point.
Okay, so what are we gonna do for the next 56 minutes? Here it is. What Wendy asked us to do was really to talk to you a little bit about using professional learning communities with your peers. And we fully understand that you have a variety of experiences with PLCs. And because you guys just started this grant, you probably haven't had a chance to do too many PLCs together. And so this is just kind of could be a review for you. It could be an introduction for you. And it may be just an opportunity for you to talk with peers and kind of refresh on some things that you already know, but that I think always help us to stay focused in the work that we're doing. So we're going to start off with kind of the purpose of PLCs, or professional learning communities, kind of the processes that we recommend, things that we recommend when you plan for your PLCs, and then really what they might look like when you're actually in practice. And we just really think all 4 of these are not only lovely and alliterate, and that alliteration here, but also just that we think that these 4 elements are really important for you to think about to make the best use of your time. And as teachers, that's incredibly important.
So before we get too far, I know some of you joined us and learned about Private Eye in November. And at that time, we asked you all to go on and make an account on iCivic so you could start exploring. If you didn't, don't worry, we're going to tell you how to do it at the end. We asked you all to explore the site and, find a mystery that might support the instruction you're already doing, because we're all going to get together again in March and talk about that. But I know one of the things we said was to prepare questions. And I always hate when someone asks me if I have any questions and then doesn't give me a chance to ask them. And so we thought we would just pause for a minute at the beginning so that if any of you do have questions and you either want to throw it in the chat or unmute and ask a question, we're happy to answer any quick questions up front before we jump into our topic for the day.
And if you don't have any questions, it's okay. But we thought we would open it up just to start.
Well, we'll leave that as a standing offer to throw any questions in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer those. So what is a PLC? We in the education world are so good, right, at throwing around all sorts of letter combinations and words. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, a professional learning community is a group of educators who meet regularly. They share expertise to improve their teaching skills and student outcomes. These aren't evaluative places. These are supportive, cooperative, safe places where we can sort of get out of the box of our classroom and enjoy the collective expertise. And I think that's one of the great things about the grant program you're all involved in, is it gets you out of your classroom and it gets you talking to other educators. And a PLC is just a place to do that. And, many of you may end up as leaders in your schools, leading PLCs for others. And so we really want to think about how to maximize that time, because we get so little of it that we want to make sure it's valuable.
So one thing we thought we might ask, and this is kind of varied on your experience, but why do you all think a PLC might be useful? For you, what might you get out of it? If you're just being introduced to it, what might you think the purpose of it might be? But if folks could open their chat and just kind of pop in an idea, if someone were to ask you why have a PLC? Why have a professional learning community? What do you think you might get out of that? So what do you think? Why do we have PLCs? Yes, Roger, share the workload.
Oh, bounce ideas, learn from others. Learn from others, collaborate. Yeah. Talk with others. Yeah. Tackle a common problem. Oh, Jackie, thanks for putting that in. Right. Sometimes, we're all dealing with the same thing. And if we're not talking, we don't even know it. We're all in our classrooms thinking we're the only one with the issue. Get ideas from others, decide what needs to be worked on. If you're like me, I sometimes listen to my colleagues and I get so jazzed up. It renews me. It gives me a burst of energy to keep going, especially this time of year.
I'm wondering just quickly, and I know not everybody can do this because some of you might be on a Chromebook, but for those of you who can, or if you're just have your camera on, you can give an actual thumbs up. How many of you actually are part of a PLC already? Skylar, I see you. Good. Brooke, I see you. Oh, Autumn, thank you. Cindy, Mindy, thank you. Good. And I guarantee you, because in the short time I've known Wendy, I know that she's going to get you guys doing PLCs with each other too, which will be really fantastic, because I know that you guys are great leaders. And so that's going to be a whole nother level of kind of engagement and learning from each other and helping each other, which is so amazing. Good. Okay, Nicole, I see that. Tracy, great. Awesome. Okay, so what I would like to do now is just talk a little bit about, from our point of view, what's the purpose of PLCs? So you guys kind of hit all these when you said this, but one of the things that I like to just remind us that we all know that we sometimes don't ever have time for this is, just having some time to think, right? We, as rough as it may sound, like some days it feels like it's hard to find time to pee, never mind time to think, right? And so the reality is that the fact that you might have an hour where you cannot be meeting the immediate needs of the children around you to just think about teaching and learning is really something incredibly special. Time to collaborate. They can be very isolating, or you might just only work with your team or your grade level, and having a chance to collaborate with others is really great. Helping us see our blind spots. We all have them. As you guys mentioned, collective expertise, and sometimes you need that collective energy, right? Because it's, 4:11 and you have one more day left maybe before you're off for an entire week, and you know that the children are going to be wild tomorrow, and you think, all right, I need somebody else's energy right now. And that's real for the purpose of a PLC. So one of the things, so at Private Eye History Detectives and Histories Mysteries, we're slightly obsessed with inquiry, but we really think inquiry is a fantastic way to learn. And we actually kind of view a PLC as kind of an inquiry cycle. So with students, you might pose a question, look at some evidence or a primary source, come up with some conclusions, and have students present that material in different ways. In a PLC, if you think about it, you're bringing forth a question for your peers to look at. You're examining materials, you're drawing conclusions, and you're coming up with a plan of action. And so really the PLC cycle is actually an inquiry cycle itself, which is fantastic because you get to engage in inquiry that hopefully you're also engaging with your students in. And so we always use this little graphic for our own mysteries that we create at Private Eye History Detectives, but it's the same idea. You're starting with a question, you're investigating whatever gets brought to the table, you're drawing some conclusions and brainstorming collaboratively, and then leaving some time to reflect, which will be a major theme here, because you really don't want to spend all this time working together and then forget it all in 2 days. So you need to come up with a way to really retain what it is that happens there so that your future self will be thanking that day's self. So that's something that's really important to think about. So today, our goal is to frame kind of our, presentation around an inquiry question. By the time you leave, you'll be able to reflect a little bit on how do we get the most out of our professional learning communities.
So we're going to talk about it in sort of 3 different scenarios. You might want to bring a lesson to your PLC before you've ever taught it. And we're going to talk about why you might want to do that and what that might look like. You might take a very traditional approach and you've taught a lesson, you've reflected on it personally, and now you want to bring it to your team or your group and reflect on it and have them address your question. And the last type is you might want to spend your PLC sometimes just looking at student work with a focus question. You really want to dig in and spend some deep time with the benefit of extra eyes looking at student work. And so we're going to spend some time looking at each of those scenarios and what that might look like in your PLC. So to do so, this is actually one of our Private Eye mysteries. It's a 3rd grade mystery. And the mystery question is, why did Americans declare independence on July 4th, 1776? We figure you need to be looking at something. So we figured we'd focus on this one unit and one mystery as we were talking about PLCs. So to give you a little context, that's the question. These are cards that at the very beginning, we have students cut and sort to pre-teach some of these really big concepts that they're not going to be familiar with immediately in third grade. And so students are going to sort these ideas and concepts into, good actions or just actions of government and unjust actions. And once they've had a chance to think about them, they're going to then take that knowledge and that understanding, and they're going to begin to look at the Declaration of Independence for clues. But guess what? We're not just going to send the, third graders into the Declaration. We're going to do a nice tight dive into the preamble, which has been modified, we think, with, veracity to the original, having told them that it's modified, having looked at the original. And they're going to start to match those just beliefs that they've already had a time to talk about and explore and sort to the actual text that they're now looking at. And so they're going to do that. Then they're going to look at the long train of abuses and the unjust actions of the British. And again, going back to the cards they had and pre-taught. And then in this case, I'm trying to think what's next. They then are going to choose one unjust action to draw and explain why the colonists thought it was unjust. So this could be a lesson that you're thinking, I teach about the American Revolution. This might be a good way to look at it. I know we're supposed to be diving into primary founding documents. This seems like a scaffolded approach, and I might do something like this in my classroom. And so as we begin to think about doing that, you might want to bring this lesson to your PLC before you were teaching it. And why might you bring a lesson to the PLC? Well, first and foremost, you might be doing just like I said, you're exploring a new curriculum. It might be private eye, it might be any other of the wonderful things that Wendy has introduced you to in your group. And you want to explore it, and you want some other eyes with you. Maybe you're planning to introduce this, and you're thinking about the very unique challenges above the students that are in your classroom. Maybe you have a high population of ELs. Maybe you have, an inclusive classroom, and we all have inclusive classrooms, but you have a deliberately inclusive classroom with some high needs kiddos that you need to think about specific adaptations for. Maybe you want to anticipate the challenges. This is a new way of thinking. Maybe you have to think about, this is an inquiry-based lesson. Maybe I need to talk to my peers. I might need to do something else first. And you might want to bring it to think about how you're going to frame this. What context are you going to need in your classroom? So those are some reasons you might consider bringing a lesson that you've never taught to a PLC to get that collective energy. Maybe a group of you are going to teach it, and you really all want to talk about this before you get in there. So before teaching, how are you going to prepare? Well, you're going to need to review that lesson yourself. You're going to identify the key materials that you're going to want to share, and you're going to want to create a focus question. And just like a good inquiry, the output of your PLC is kind of as good as the question you ask. You want to ask a question that's really going to meet your needs as an educator. And Skylar's question is not going to be the same as Brooke's question, because they have different classrooms and different purposes. And I think really focusing on what you want from the group will help you do that. So if we look at that, is that next or are you next? Oh,
yep. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about why you might bring a lesson after teaching it, and then kind of look at that same framework. And then we'll talk a little bit about what it might look like when you bring it forward. So after you've taught the lesson, here are some reasons why you might choose to do that instead of before. So first of all, to reflect while it's fresh. And that really goes along with this idea of being kind to your future self, which is one of my favorite things to say. And I say it to my students all the time. But the idea is that we all know that after we teach a lesson, it's freshest in our mind, what we want to change about it, and the fact that we want to change things. And so if you think about it right then, you reflect on it right then, you get some feedback, and then you make sure to record that feedback and put it somewhere where you can find it. your future self is going to be like, wow, I'm so glad I did that. Because you're going to have that material the next time you go to teach that ready to go. So that is a big piece of this. The other thing is a lot of times your peers can see things you can't see. You know, you're in the middle of it, you're in the heat of it, something went really wrong or something went really well, but there was, you know, one little issue. Sometimes you can't see it. And so that can really help you to kind of lay it out for folks, and maybe they're going to see things you can't. And then also to help you plan your next steps, because maybe the outcome of your lesson is going to help you kind of rearrange what you're going to actually teach next. And so preparing a little differently for after teaching. So the first thing that we're going to heavily recommend is that you actually write down a reflection to bring to your PLC. So in theory, you could show up and you could just say it, but most likely your PLC is after school. People are tired. And then you're going to ask them to look at a lesson, and then you're going to ask them to focus on a question. And by the time they get to that, they may very well have forgotten what you just said. But if you do a quick write-up reflection and bring that to them, either sharing it digitally or handing it to them, they can lay everything out in front of them. And so while it may seem like an extra step, we're pretty sure that you're going to get more out of it if you bring a written reflection with you. Then obviously you have to identify what to share. And one of the themes that we will continue to say throughout this entire thing is you're not going to have a PLC that's much longer than 45 minutes to an hour. You have to choose carefully what you bring so it's achievable in the time that you have. So you can't bring 40 slides, 6 handouts, a 4-page reflection, and, a transcript that is also 10 pages, right? You got to choose carefully what can you bring that will give them enough information so they can give you feedback, but at the same time, isn't going to overtake the entire thing. And then, as Lori said, create a question. And a big part about creating a question too, those of you who've done PLCs will know what I'm talking about here. Those of you who haven't, this is a good thing to think about. PLCs can be really hard if you bring something forward and you don't give people something to focus on, because it can sometimes feel like you're being attacked, because you may get feedback you don't necessarily want. And so if you're going to lead a PLC, which I know you're all leaders, you want to help teachers come and feel safe. And so if I say the only thing I want feedback on is X, then I'm prepared to get feedback on that. And so it's a really nice way to help people get adjusted to doing a PLC by making sure that they get to control what they're getting feedback on. And so that's why a focus question can be so incredibly important.
So step 1, I'm bringing my lesson, before I ever teach it to the PLC. What would I think about imposing a question? So if I were exploring a new curriculum that was brand new to me, brand new to maybe my team, I might want to ask a question like, why would this lesson be helpful in my history class? What about this particular lesson do you think is going to move the needle in my history class? If I'm looking or planning to adapt a new or existing unit and I want to do it beforehand, I might bring it in, and some of the things I might bring, and I'm going to jump back for a minute, is I might bring a short description of the special population in my classroom that I'm trying to accommodate for and sort of get that collective expertise. So say, what would I need to change, scaffold, or supplement for this group of students? Or what challenges do you think my students with language-based disabilities might have, or my ELs might have? So I might have a very tight focus based on my student population. And if I'm looking for sort of what context we're going to need to provide for students, or what background knowledge they're going to need, that might be my question. I might have to ask them to look. I'm too in the weeds, and I need someone from the outside of my classroom to help me think, what knowledge am I assuming they have that they might not have? So those are the things I might want to ask ahead of time.
So if I were bringing my lesson after I taught it, so again, I'm bringing this revolution lesson, it's about the Declaration of Independence, I would possibly use some of these questions. So how should my reflection guide my next steps? So I wrote it down, I brought it to you. What do you all think? What should be my next steps? Or I gave you my reflection. What would you do differently if you were teaching this lesson? I might ask, right? Getting those outside eyes. And then lastly, I bring my reflection, right? How should I change, add, or adapt this based on my reflection? And so giving teachers really a chance to look at my reflection with a different set of eyes and giving me some feedback about where to go next.
So step 2 is the examination of materials. And we've really talked about this. What do they need to see to adequately give feedback? And it might be only a short part of the lesson plan, a short part of something else, the objective, really thinking about what's reasonable in the time frame and going back and looking, is that focus question crystal clear? So we're going to stay focused and I'm going to get the information I need. And so in the case of my bringing a lesson beforehand, I'm going to again go back to our private eye example. I would probably take some part of the lesson plan, the transcript, maybe some of the slides and the student documents, and figure out which pieces of those do they need to answer this question. And it might not be any of one of them, but it might be some of the other. Kelly?
And if I was going to, if I'm bringing materials for teachers to review, it's going to look very similar, but the reflection should really be the focus point, but then giving teachers just enough information so they get what was actually going on in the lesson. So here I included student handouts, maybe a couple pieces of the slideshow, and then also maybe a little bit like a summary from the lesson plan. But thinking about, like, you really don't want to spend more than a third probably of your PLC having people review materials, because you want to give time for them to actually share what they're seeing and what outcomes they have, what outcomes they're recommending. And then also you want to reserve some time at the end for reflection.
So let's talk briefly about using PLC time to look at student work. So why would we do this? First and foremost, to understand what students actually learned, to really get a sense of, did they master the objective? You might do this to notice patterns in student work. You might use this to, again, see what you can't see. Having someone else look at student work who wasn't as thick into it, sometimes things leap out to them, either misconceptions or something about what students took away. And then identifying changes that you might need to make or students might need to make based on evidence. So evidence-based change. So how would you prepare? And again, obviously it's going to depend on the question, but you're going to want to choose a limited number of samples or items. So maybe you're choosing one question out of a 5-question response and you give samples of that. Maybe you're going to want to choose some sort of cross-section. Do you want representative samples of sort of every level and every subgroup of students in your classroom? Or is your question really about, how are my students on individual education plans doing with this material or this format of learning? So you might, on the other hand, want to look at a small subset of student work. You're going to want to identify and prepare the key lesson materials that are going to help them understand what the students were responding to, because that's one of those blind spots, right? We could decide that the children know nothing, or we could look at the prompt and realize that perhaps I wasn't as clear as I thought I was in my directions or in my focus. And again, really having that tight focus question for what you're looking for. So in this case, we're asking them to choose one unjust action and to draw. This was, though, during COVID. And so we got a variety of work samples. This is from a combined grade 2-3 classroom. And as you can see, even in just these 2 initial samples, they look pretty different. What do people notice? Can you see those at all?
Yes, we can see them.
All right. What do you see?
Yeah, what do you see? If you could just Either unmute or type. We love your voices. You know, what evidence of learning? So they were looking for an unjust action that angered the colonists. They're very quiet.
Yeah.
We want to show them some more work to get there.
Yeah, there's something definitely I want to make a point of on the last one. Maybe take a look at these. This one has a little bit more text. Oh, Roger says they explained the action they chose very well. So there's a lot of detail, right, in those, and they're explaining in a lot of detail for sure.
Mm-hmm. As you can see, we had some alternative to drawing here.
So one of the things that I noticed when we began to get this information back, because this is the thing, these weren't our classrooms, right? They were somebody else's classroom. Yeah.
Me too, Brooke.
So cool.
I imagine this kiddo who maybe like the writing isn't, but is so excited to show what he knew or she knew using Legos.
And notice that they've taken a Lego person with a red shirt and have drawn sort of it into a British uniform and have them lying in someone's bed, which is one of my favorite parts about this. But it kind of links to a pattern that we noticed. When we started getting this work in, one of the things that we noticed was this was the most common complaint, right? The list of particulars in the Declaration of Independence lists all these things that the British government did to the American colonists. And the one that students wrote and drew about the most was the fact that people were asked to house soldiers in their house, like without permission. And, when we began to think about that a little bit more carefully and look at the other lists, we realized that for young learners, that was probably the only one of those that they could personally relate to, right? Taxation, soldiers
trade with other countries
without permission, trading with other countries, even assemblies, right? Like the assembly people can't meet. What does that mean? But they could understand, I don't want a stranger in my house sleeping in my bed, right? And so in a way like that led us to understand that we needed to provide some ideas about pre-teaching some of the complaints, because the students would understand some and not the other. And so there's just an example of something that can come out of student work that you might not anticipate. Maybe you would, but you might not. And so student work can be really helpful in giving us like a window or a lens into that type of thing.
And into the classroom, clearly as you look, somebody had a pretty extensive lesson or background knowledge. Yes.
Exactly.
On the Boston Tea Party, I mean, we've got the names of the boats. We've got lots of detail there in this one. So it's really interesting to look at student work, not just as evaluating students, but also looking at like, wait a minute, why am I seeing this? And what's that telling me? Not so much about the students, but about me, my teaching, their understanding. And so it's helpful. And it's really helpful to do it with a group. That's
what I was going to say too. When you see the products from other teachers who've taught this same lesson or approaching this the same way, and you may say, oh, well, how did you come up with that? Because my kids are drawing this boat with all the detail and rather.
Yeah, it is very telling and interesting, because then it helps us get better collectively.
Exactly. So in terms of student work, posing questions again could go from what was learned, what would mastery look like? What am I looking at to know they mastered the basic objective? And did students demonstrate it? And, really catching ourselves from not responding only to the quality of their letter formation or the ability of their drawing, but really looking for the evidence of understanding of the concept. looking for those patterns among different groups. And then how can we use, evidence from student work to guide our next steps? So those are questions you might all want to consider as you move in. Examination of materials, how many and which samples are you going to bring? I always say, don't bring me your 3 best students. We're not going to learn a lot. we need to see what everybody learned. We need to teach everyone in the class, not some children in the class. Again, what's reasonable for them to look at, how clear can the question be? And then the last one, is the connection between your question and the work they're looking at clear? Is a question that we're asking actually able to be answered just by looking at that work? And if not, what else do they need? We're at that time. And so in this case, I suggested you might pair it with the actual assignment and maybe the lesson plan, or even a portion of the lesson plan, so that they could understand that, we didn't just teach about the soldiers. If you got all of them, there were actually 5 or 6 other things that were taught in this lesson. So helping us get better.
Okay. And so we have now looked at 3 different ways, and the first 2 steps are different for those 3 different ways. But when you really get to steps 3 and 4, when you're in the PLC, we're just making some quick recommendations for like step 3 and 4. And then we're actually going to pop you into some breakout rooms to think collectively about this. And to, again, even though it's a day before you go on break for many of you, your future self will be thanking your this afternoon self for doing a little bit of work on thinking about this ahead of time. So once you're in the meeting and you've reviewed the materials, really, when you get to that brainstorming part, whether you're leading the PLC or you're presenting the PLC, you really want to make sure your team focuses on the question. What are we doing? What's the task? What are we trying to get done here? Recording all of the ideas without judgment. So just collecting the ideas, not evaluating them. And then the last one we just heavily recommend, and it's a little awkward sometimes, but once the presenter presents their work, be quiet and just listen. Because if you feel the need to talk, sometimes it makes you feel like you have to be defensive or that you have to answer everybody's comments. And so if the protocol is just to be quiet and listen, it actually relieves you from having to feel like you have to answer everybody's questions, and you can just soak it in and listen. And so we really, even though it might feel awkward at first, we really recommend this. And then the last part we also recommend is to be kind to your future self and write stuff down. Take the 10 minutes after the meeting and just write down, what am I going to do next? And then put it somewhere where you can find it. Because when you teach this again, you're going to want to be able to find it, and you don't want to waste any moment, because no teacher wants to waste any moment. We know that for sure. And so again, like, be kind to your future self by writing it down, edit the materials right there if you can, right? And get ready to teach it again. So you're ready for the next time. So here's what we're going to do now. There are currently 20 of you here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop us into some breakout rooms, like between 4 and 5 people. And what we're going to need for that breakout room is an actual form. Only one person in the group has to fill out this form for the group. So hopefully somebody will be a willing group member and we'll fill this out. But I'm going to ask, I just popped it into the chat. If people could go ahead and give us the okay that they can actually reach that and get to that, that would be lovely.
Oops, I see a thumb up.
Brooke says yes. Do we have a couple more?
Oh, Skylar says yes. Yep.
All right.
They're in.
Okay, so I'm hoping that when I pop you into some breakout rooms here, and you will have one person in each group that'll be willing. So everybody should try to open it if you can. Obviously, if you're on your phone and you're having trouble, then we can hopefully get somebody in your group to do it for you. So what I'm going to do is put you into some groups for about 15 minutes or so, maybe a little less, like 12. And there's like 3 questions. The first is kind of what materials would you bring? What elements would you include in a reflection if you were going to do a reflection and bring it forward? And then what guiding questions would you suggest to accompany student work? So there's a few questions, you're going to answer them and hit submit, and we'll share all the results with you and you'll actually be able to see them. But this will give you a chance to just talk a little bit in a group for a short period of time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and in one moment open these rooms. And so I'm going to set it for 12 minutes and I'm going to give you 60 seconds to come out. So you know how it says like it's shutting, and then it'll give you an extra minute to finish up. If when you pop in there, if one person could just volunteer to be the typer and read the questions, that would be awesome, so that every group has one. And otherwise, if everybody's good, I'm going to go ahead and open. If you have questions or you get stuck, pop back into the main room, and you should be able to do that without any problem. So I'm going to go ahead and hang on one sec. There we go. That way it'll automatically pop you in there. So hopefully that's going to pop you in, and pop back if you have questions. And Lawrence, is it letting you go in? Are you stuck in purgatory here? Not sure if he's,
Yeah.
I know he's in room 1, but I don't know whether it's not showing up.
I don't know.
Let's see. I'm just gonna chat him to see.
I was making people very quiet, so I came back.
Yeah, that's the way it goes sometimes.
No, it does. No, especially I think an outsider. This isn't, it's not my PLC.
We used to do this when I worked at the State Department. We did this thing with PLCs, and it was called the rabbit task. And the math teacher would assign this task about how many, if you create your fence in a certain way, which way has the most area, so you can have the most rabbits, right? And it was hilarious to put those huge posters up of student work, because at first you're like, oh, look how cute they drew these rabbits. And you could tell like some kids had spent an hour drawing these 30 rabbits. And then there's another kid over here that wrote this explanation of how the area was, you know what I'm saying? It was just, it doesn't take long for you to go, oh, maybe the focus was wrong or different or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And even by saying this, I'm going to count for neatness, or creativity, and they'll spend a lot of time.
Well, it's amazing when I talk with my student teachers. I always say, like, the hardest thing to get is directions, like giving clear directions and making sure that the task you're giving students actually accomplishes what your objective is. And it is very difficult, and it seems so obvious.
It's not.
But just because you get it, I always say, like, just because you understand it intellectually doesn't mean that you can automatically put it into practice.
No.
That's the tricky part.
Well, and I think too, like, especially elementary teachers who have some just really concrete thinkers.
Yes.
Who can't, prioritize and don't have some of those executive functioning, like everything you say has equal weight.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, you sort of have to, particularly, I was a high school teacher. I had to do, even at the end of my teaching career, I had to work out whatever it is. I'm asking you to write this thing or do this thing. I'd have to do it and say, oh, okay, there's only one answer to this, and that's not what I intended. You know what I mean? I try to think of it from 3 perspectives. I'm like, I can't, because they don't exist.
Well, that was one of the reasons why we wanted to make this curriculum, because it's like finding the right primary source, matching it with what you're supposed to do, making sure the activity you're doing, actually they can use the primary source to find the evidence. There's so many steps in that. And we just felt like there's no way that teachers have the time to do this, even if they can.
Exactly.
So
I worked on text sets. It was all about text complexities when the
Yep.
Mhm.
core, was
Yes.
really in its heyday. And but I worked in this national organization where we worked on just text sets, and I nerded out for a year on it. I mean, it was the most fun I'd had in a long time, just thinking about, everything I saw and read and experienced. I'd be like, oh, that would fit so well into this text set.
Well,
I,
and I think remind each other.
I almost hit stop too. Lord, I'm glad I didn't do that.
All right, so people should be coming back.
Welcome back.
Perfect. All right, folks, well, welcome back. Hopefully you had a chance to get as far as you could on the form. And if you just, whoever was taking notes in your group, if you just want to submit, if you want to just put in a couple letters in the required ones, if you didn't get to them, that's fine, or just say didn't get to it and then hit submit. That way we can share everything with you all, and you can keep it as like a collective information. We can share it with Wendy as well. So we've got about 7 minutes left together. And so what we wanted to acknowledge is, we could do a quick share out, but the nice thing is you're going to have all that information already. And so, and I know people are probably itching to move on with their day as we get closer to things. And so what we wanted to do was kind of close out. And then, of course, Jackie shared the evaluation link. So you've got to do that. And then also, we're going to see you again in March. And so we wanted to remind folks what we were hoping that you would do before March, so that you could, at least have that in the back of your head as you move on through the winter.
And we hope you have fun with it. So what we're really hoping you'll do before we meet so that we can reflect on it and share out at that time is, go on to iCivics, go into Private Eye History Detectives, select a mystery unit to support your instruction. And one of the things we really encourage teachers to do is shop around, even though something might say grade 3, every state puts things in a little different place. So, if you're teaching the Revolution, you'll find it in grade 3, you'll find it in grade 5. Their maps can be found in 2 and 4. Play, give yourself a little bit of time to just enjoy and spend a little time. Next, we want you to teach an introduction to inquiry. And that's one of the unit lessons that is just a standalone. It's not content-based. It's about introducing students to the skill of inquiry. And we've found it really helps to have students do it without sort of the extra layer of content on top of it. So they can really lean into that process of, observing and asking questions and those things. And then hopefully you'll have some time to implement a private eye mystery in your class and be able to talk about it and what worked for you and what didn't, and talk to each other about it. And so we're really looking forward to meeting with you in March. I think it's the middle of March. And if you could do those things before we meet, it will just make the time together a little more rich.
And we'll be kind of modeling that actual meeting together around a PLC. So we'll be able to share what people have done, and we'll give you some framework for that before March. So if you have not done so already, if you would at some point get onto the iCivics website, and if you go over here, when you click to sign in, if you haven't made an account, you just register as a teacher. You can also just sign in using Google, which is probably the easiest way to do so. Everything is free. It will always be free. We would not have partnered with iCivics if they did not promise for it to forever be free. And so don't think that there's some weird trick that they're all of a sudden going to start charging you for things. If you've used iCivics before, it's all free. You just have to make an account so they can keep track. A lot of it's for grant stuff, which you guys are aware of because you're in a grant. But really, it really will stay free.
And you can download and adapt them. I just want to say that you don't have to go every time you're going to teach it.
And if you weren't in our training earlier, it's all Google. And so you can adapt, you can change, you can create your own copy and do what works for you. So we are super pleased to have spent an hour with you at this very precious time of year. And we're happy to stick around for questions, but we're also happy to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and a Happy Hanukkah if you celebrate, or whatever it is you're going to do when you get the next couple of weeks off. Just, enjoy some time with your family and to rest and to celebrate.
Renew, rest, rejuvenate.
Yeah.
You give so much every day. We know it. We've heard such wonderful things about you. I have to say, I've never worked with someone who brags on their teachers as much as Wendy. And I told her I thought she was exaggerating until I met you all in November. But truly, we want you to do that. But we are happy to hang out and answer any questions. I know not everybody wants to ask in front of folks, but Kelly and I are happy to do that. And we're also happy to have you do your eval and get on with your very busy lives.
So thank you so much for having us. And, if you have any questions, I'll pop the last link I'll pop in is just our
thank
email
you.
so that you can get that if you would like to email us.
Yep. And never hesitate if you have a question. This comes to both Kelly and I, and one of us is sure to pick it up in pretty short order and get back to you if you have questions.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. If anyone has any last minute questions, please feel free to ask. And if not, it is so good to see you all this evening. And is tomorrow the last day for most of you before Christmas? I see it's
Roger doesn't
Oh,
like us.
Roger.
Roger, I'm with you. We teach all next week here in Massachusetts.
All next week.
got 2
Roger,
days.
on you. We want to know.
We have to go Monday and Tuesday,
Oh,
but we did get a whole week off for Thanksgiving, so that was
oh no. Wow.
that's never
I would have
happened.
loved that.
It's never happened before, so
All right. Kelly,
Well-
we're moving to Kentucky now.
I know. And that's here in my district. I guess it's different for every district. We teach all the way through to Friday. We have a half day on Friday, but I couldn't believe it when I saw that. I said, really? So
wow, yeah,
it's gonna be a little wild next week, I think.
yes, just a little bit. It's
Anybody
wild.
have any questions? Oh, you know what? I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that it'll be easier for you all.
See people.
I also appreciate those of you that always turn on your video. It really
I
does make
know.
a difference seeing your faces. I know some of you are in your car and you're trying to get home and all that as well, but it's good to see you.
I
Hope you have a-
understand those who don't, but I have to say it's so much more fun to see people
It
and
is.
see reactions. So thank you for your willingness.
Yeah.
And I like this cat tiger mascot too. I can't quite see it.
So what's your school? What's your school, Mindy?
Barberville Tigers.
Yeah, I was going to say, I believe that's
Okay.
Barberville.
Yeah.
All right.
That's a serious tiger.
I
That's like-
know. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Thanks.
Well, you have a good one over there at Barberville.
All right.
Take
Nice to
care.
See you, Mindy. Take care.
Enjoy your break.
All right.
Yeah, thank you,
Christine,
ladies, so
Debbie,
much.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and
I know.
maybe we'll see you sometime soon.
I'm sure you will. I looked on the calendar and it's not all filled out yet. So I couldn't tell you which day in March, but always good
Yeah.
to see you ladies. And I hope to see